Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion on Zakat and Islamic finance. I'm delighted to be joined by Mufti Faraz Adam today, a globally recognized scholar and Sharia advisor in Islamic finance. He is the founder and director of Amana Advisors, where he works with financial institutions and investment platforms around the world to develop Sharia compliant financial solutions. He is particularly well known, something that we're going to capitalize on today, for making complex topics like zakat on modern investments clear and practical for everyday investors. Mufti Faraz, it's a pleasure as always to speak to you and to have you with us today.
Jazakallah khair. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you and the Nesta team in discussing this very important topic, which everybody has questions about at this time of the year, so it's very timely.
Yes, I agree. So what I wanted to do, Mufti Faraz, and for the benefit of our audience, just to set the scene for what's going to come in this seminar or this recording, what we're going to look at today is the Nesta product, which is based upon the contract of Murabaha. We also have a second product which is being launched, which is based on ijara. So we'll talk a little bit about that for when that is available. But what we want to do is focus on the practical aspects of zakat in relation to Murabaha first of all. And so what I'm proposing that we do is we have a bit of a discussion around zakat first, and then we'll focus on an example, on a case study, which will be kind of like a live transaction where we'll have some certain facts presented and we'll align the discussion points to the case study specifically. So that's the idea for today. I think to frame and to set the scene for the first question and for the audience, particularly for those who may be new to Islamic finance or for our non-Muslim customers, because they may also be interested in looking at this, can you briefly explain what zakat is and the role that it plays in Islam?
For sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So zakat is an annual payment that Muslims make, which is 2.5% on qualifying assets. Now, not everybody is eligible to pay this. Those who are eligible to pay, they meet certain conditions and criteria. They'll be responsible and accountable to pay this on an annual basis. If we take a step away from the technical kind of definition and just try to understand really what is the spirit of zakat about and why do we do this, every practice in Islam is really a manifestation of gratitude. That's what it is. And zakat is a form of gratitude on the resources that we've been blessed with. That's what it really is. And how do we be grateful with resources that we've been given? Because this is our belief. Whatever I have, it's not really I've earned it. Rather, I've been blessed with it. So what's the way to show gratitude? It's by sharing those same resources with people who don't have it. And that's what the zakat system is all about. It's a system of purification and distribution. It purifies me as the payer, but it also allows money and allows goods and resources to flow in the economy, empower individuals. It's a safety net for the entire society. That's why there's always an annual zakat payment being made. The objective is there should be nobody in our society who is sleeping rough, who has no meals for the day, who's struggling to make ends meet. That should not be the case, because those are barriers for people to grow. So zakat really gives opportunities to people. And that's what we have to understand. And I always say one thing: when we pay zakat, feel your zakat. One is paying, right? One is paying. It's now the world that we live in. Obviously, it's convenience, doing it online, just sending a bank transfer. That's how zakat is.
Yeah.
But even
if you can find someone and give it to them, that has a different taste to it, right?
Absolutely. Like that is the hand to hand, the connection of the eyes, the connection of the hearts. That is really where the brotherhood, your purification is done in that particular moment. When you see what you're doing, when you see the face of the recipient and you honor them, that lowers you. You're lifting one person and you're lowering yourself, right? And that's how we get this balance in society. So that is really the spirit of zakat. And this is why, as Muslims, we are very fond of this practice. It's not a burden. Even the way it's calculated, by the way, it's not meant to be a burden. And we can discuss this as we go on further.
Yes. No, we will look at that. No, that's amazing. Thank you very much. So can you, I mean, you've touched on that slightly already, but can you sort of elaborate on the difference between voluntary charity, which we call sadaqah, and, you know, why zakat is considered an obligation rather than just a recommendation? And maybe that's now coming back to the sort of more fiqhy side of things.
So zakat has been obliged by the Quran and the Sunnah. It's a very clear command and instruction by Allah, and that's what makes it an obligation. It is a command to do this. We are instructed to do this. The lawgiver, Allah, has commanded us to pay a portion of this wealth. Sadaqah is simply a voluntary and recommended action. We are encouraged to give always. That recommendation is always there in the background. So if you want to get closer to Allah and be even more, you could say, compliant or even closer to Allah and the Sunnah, then for you to go and give sadaqah is a great thing. For you to align yourself with the prophetic way, sadaqah is there. But the baseline, the kind of foundation which everyone should meet is zakat. If you have the resources, this is just baseline activity. So our giving starts from 2.5%. I always like to frame it in that way. It's not it doesn't start from zero.
It's not a limiting factor. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So just without delving too much into Murabaha or Ijara for the moment, still keeping it sort of general, when it comes to investments more generally, what is the underlying principle that determines whether you have to pay zakat on assets? Is there like a threshold? Is there a category of assets that we need to consider?
So the way zakat works is zakat is based on assets which are acquired for growth purposes. That's the real principle. Anything you hold with the intention to resell for capital gain for growth purposes, that asset then is activated as a zakatable asset. Now, there's three types of assets really that capture this principle. One is money. Gold and silver are zakatable, not because of just being gold and silver or precious metals, but because they're moneyness. That's the reason why. So we pay zakat on fiat currency by extension.
Yes.
But anything which has moneyness in it and people are circulating and using as money will also be subject to zakat, because money, gold, silver, their very nature is that it's liquid, it's moving, it's flowing, it's exchanging, it's changing hands. So people are always trying to increase their money. That's the nature of money. So because it's a growth asset from that perspective, whoever gets this, nobody holds on to it. The idea is to use it again. So that's why it's zakatable. The second category is trade assets, business stock, inventory, stock. Again, the idea is I want to grow this. I buy these to sell with profit. So, and this is where the philosophy of zakat is very important. Zakat is not meant to diminish your principal and capital. Really, zakat is generally paid and typically paid from the growth. That's why you have 1 year period to pay your zakat. So if I, for instance, on the 1st of Muharram, a very simple example, I reach the threshold, the nisab, zakat is binding upon me on the 1st now of Muharram, but the actual obligation to pay happens after 12 months. Why? Because it allows me to generate profits, to generate some capital and extra or some return.
Some growth on that. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the zakat will come from the growth.
MashaAllah.
So it's just like a haircut on the growth. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And you're just paying that. So it's never meant to be a burden. It's always meant to be, this is, in fact, it's a gratitude for even the growth that we've received, if you really think about it.
A lot of people get it confused with, effectively, when we, in secular sort of societies, they draw the parallel with income tax. And they kind of think that zakat is like an income tax, which is obviously a huge misconception that people have at this time of the year, especially.
That's right. That's right. It's not based on your annual earnings at all. It's based. It's more like a balance sheet snapshot calculation,
It's a snapshot.
as opposed to income
Yeah.
statements. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the third, I just want to finish off my third point. So the three principles or the three types of assets, right? So we mentioned cash, gold, silver,
Yeah.
moneyness. Second was stock, inventory, trading assets. And number three was animals that a person has acquired, again, to grow the flock, to grow the herd. That is subject to zakat because, again, growth is the underlying factor up here. And that's why zakat also means growth.
Yeah, I remember having to memorize all those zakat tables for different animals.
Oh, yes.
Mufti Saab, those were tough days.
Those are the good old days.
Those are the good old days. Those are the good old days. Okay, so thank you very much. I think that's sufficient sort of for framing the conversation. So if we maybe now move forward a little bit, and we're going to now talk specifically about Murabaha and Ijara. But before we delve into each of these different types of product category, I think it would help if it would help the audience if you could perhaps briefly explain what Murabaha is, because there's another misconception with Murabaha, which is obviously a cost plus arrangement where a financier will be asked by a customer to buy something and then sell it to them on a higher price and typically on deferred payment terms. With a property financing business, there is sometimes a misconception that maybe you own the property. And so could you maybe just talk a little bit about Murabaha before we then delve into it in more detail? And then, of course, how that then applies also to Ijara with a description of Ijara as well.
For sure. So the structure, typically known as commodity Murabaha or Tawarruq, these are the common names used in the industry. What is done in that? Effectively, your monies are used to buy commodities. Those commodities are then sold on, and that creates a profit effectively. So there is multiple parties involved. You buy commodities, your commodities are sold to a third party, and then they sell it on in the market as well. Now, depending on who you are, sometimes if you're borrowing or if you want to receive financing, then you'll be the one buying the metals. At the same time, if you're financing, you'll be the one selling the metals. So commodity murabaha is a structure used widely in the market. It's a way to generate liquidity. It's a way to generate funds through the trade of metals or assets and goods and commodities. That's all that's happening. But the key idea up here is it involves trade. It's not lending at all. You're buying and selling commodities, which creates a receivable, a profit, because you've sold commodities for a profit. And that's why it's very different to investing in a property, having ownership, even a percentage of ownership in a property. That's a different type of arrangement and structure. Up here, it's very much buying and selling. And because buying and selling is trade activity, that's why the zakat question on commodity murabaha is very different to owning a share in a property, because you're not buying and selling there. You've just invested and you own a share in property.
Yeah. I mean, about 25 years ago, it kind of tells you my age now when I say 25 years ago, but we used to call commodity murabaha just murabaha. And then we had another label called reverse murabaha, which was very much as you described, when you're swapping the role on who is the purchaser on the transaction. I think the description of reverse murabaha is less in vogue these days for a variety of reasons. We've just reduced it to commodity murabaha, whether on the financing or the deposit side. Now, that's very helpful, Mufti Saab. Thank you very much for explaining. And just taking that one step further before we move on to the next question, what is an ijara contract and how does that differ?
Yeah, so in ijara, what's happening is you are purchasing property and then leasing that property to a customer. That's what's happening. So it's purely, it's like a tenancy. For all intents and purposes, almost like a tenancy. You have a tenant paying you rent on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis, but you own the asset for the long term. The asset is owned by yourself. And that's, again, from a zakat treatment perspective, it's very different to the murabaha transaction, where you are not leasing a property to the customer, rather you've entered into a sale of goods effectively. And so the zakat is based upon trading activity there.
Yeah. So as we'll look in the case study, it's very important for investors to distinguish between the different types of contracts through which they're getting their return, whether it's rental, whether it's profit, or indeed whether they have an equity ownership position, because they'll all have slightly different considerations when it comes to their zakatable assets and their calculations.
Yeah, absolutely. Every Islamic finance contract has its own unique zakat treatment because of what's happening in the underlying activity.
Perfect. So now, if I can just maybe dive straight in now to Murabaha, and hopefully the audience found some of that discussion helpful. When calculating zakat on Murabaha investments, what component of the investment is subject to zakat?
Yeah, so because Murabaha involves buying commodities, and let's make it very simple. It's Nesta on behalf of the customers, but let's just use a
Yes.
customer and break
Yes.
it down as in a simple format as much as possible. So the investor is buying commodities and selling them with a markup,
Yes.
with profit. Now, because you've purchased something with the intention to sell with profit, then the entire commodity becomes zakatable plus the profit. And then when you sell the commodity, I'm owed, or the investor is owed now, the principal plus profit. All of that was in lieu of commodities, of trade
Yes.
goods. That's why it takes the ruling of all of it being zakatable, because this is trading activity. This is exact trading activity. This is what business is. You're buying low, selling high. That's what you're
Yeah.
doing. And
Yeah.
that's what makes the entire trade and the proceeds from the trade subject to zakat. If you had not sold those commodities and you're still sitting on your shelf, imagine I'm a small business. I've bought commodities to sell. I've put a margin on those commodities, but they've not sold as of yet. Then what's my zakat treatment? I would have to pay zakat on all of them at their market value or retail price.
That's your inventory.
That's
Yeah.
my inventory. So the only difference up here is I've just sold it. And that's why there's still zakat on it. So on the Nesta platform, you're literally dealing with inventory, and that's what makes it zakatable, the full amount. And that's how we're financing customers on the other side.
Great. So just sort of to break that down in the context of the Nesta product, we obviously have the investment, which you called principal. Some people might call it capital, but that's the principal part of the sales price under the Murabaha. And then we have the percentage return, which is calculated as a profit amount, which is on each opportunity. And that's the profit component of the sales price. That together is the principal and the profit, also known as the deferred sales price or the sales price. As a receivable under the Murabaha investment, zakat is payable on the entire amount. So if we were to, it will come to this in the case studies to look at actual figures and amounts, but I think the principle is very clear. And Mufti Saab, is that payable immediately when an investor enters into the contract, or can they defer it? What's the timing for payment on this?
Now, this is where the beauty of zakat comes in, and the principle of ease, and the idea that zakat is meant to be paid from the very asset itself. Because if you were burdened with paying zakat on an asset which you don't have right now, you're having to tap into other sources of income and other resources
Your
to
capital goes
cover.
down.
Exactly. And you're having now to cover the zakat on another asset. That's why one of the principles is you can wait. When it's receivables which are outstanding, you can pay now. The obligation is there, but it's perfectly permissible to delay the zakat payment for this particular asset or this receivable and pay once it's received. Then you just can't pay for the outstanding years, but you can perfectly wait. There's no issue or sin or kind of miscalculation or issue there.
Great. How does that answer change in the context of profit being paid in installments? So you might be at the time of doing your zakat calculation in receipt of some of your profit payments, but some are still to be paid to you, and in fact may never be paid to you because there might be a default.
Mm. So any profit that's already received and paid, then you just treat that as cash. You have it
Yeah,
with you. As long as you own that, you haven't spent that, you'll pay zakat on that, like how you pay zakat on all your other savings that you
on
have.
your cash balance. Yeah.
Exactly. And anything outstanding, you just have the choice of paying now or just wait until it's received and then you pay zakat for that previous year. That's all.
And if it goes on beyond 1 year, can you wait until the second year as well, or the third year?
You can do. So anything outstanding, even if it's for multiple years, I can wait until I receive it, even if it's on year 3, and pay for year 1 and year 2. That's not an issue.
Yeah.
So you don't have to pay your zakat within the 1 year. As long as it's outstanding, you can wait until it's received and then pay for all the previous years whilst it was outstanding.
Is it preferred from a sort of best practice point of view to try and do it annually whenever you calculate your zakat, because at least you then can work it out for that year, and then you might forget if you defer it to future years. Is there any sort of advice given in terms of what's preferable?
Generally, there's no preference to paying now or paying later. But if you're in the situation and the context that you mentioned, that very specific example where you may forget, you may not be able to work it out properly, you may do something wrong, then for you it becomes almost necessary to pay now. But if you
Hmm.
have a spreadsheet or you have your zakat written down and stored somewhere safe and you know what you're doing, then it's absolutely fine to wait. And really, we should be treating our zakat in the same way we treat our taxes. Like
Yeah.
how efficient we
Annual
are and
filing date.
exactly, we're so conscious of this. We don't want a
Yeah.
penalty. We want to
Yeah.
make sure everything is done on time and properly. We should have the same proficiency and the same concern for zakat. We should have our own zakat. Now, nowadays, there's many apps out there. There's many tools online which allow you to save all your information. So you can have
Yeah.
everything as a snapshot there. It becomes
Yeah.
very easy, and you can pull that data into your own spreadsheet if you want, and it becomes very easy year on year.
Yeah, completely. And just one final question, and then we'll look at the case study and apply this to a real example. We've talked about a multi-year investment, so Murabaha, let's going on for 36 months, let's say. What is the situation where an investor, may Allah protect everyone, but passes away throughout that term? So let's say, the 24-month term has passed away and maybe has got accrued zakat obligations. So they didn't actually make the payments, because if they made the payments, then there wouldn't be anything. But how should that be treated? How should the heirs and the estate deal with that?
Yeah, so if everybody must do this one thing, whilst I mean having a will is very important if you have outstanding obligations, it becomes necessary to have a will, an Islamic will in that situation. If a person has outstanding zakat, because in this case, you entered into an investment, you invested on the Nesta
Yeah.
platform, you are owed that receivable. That is zakatable, but you just have an option to delay the payment.
Yeah. And you've
Now,
chosen to pay it at the end.
yeah, you've chosen to pay at the end. What should happen is you should make a note of this, that if I was to pass away, then I want 1/3 of my portion of wasiyah, the wasiyah portion in the
Wasiyah.
will to be used to cover any outstanding obligations that I have. That's what should happen. And so that from that 1/3 portion, monies can be given for zakat purposes. This is different in other schools. That's the Hanafi school. The Hanafi school says when a person passes away, zakat simply ends, because just like your salah ends, your hajj ends, there is no zakat once a person passes away.
Even
Zakat,
on accrued obligations.
even an accrued obligation, it does say a person
Okay.
is you failed to pay effectively when it was
Yeah.
due, right? But to mitigate that, that's why we have the permission to allocate some portion of your wasiyah, and your 1/3 you bequeath that amount and say, I'd like this to cover my zakat obligation. In the other schools, so the Maliki school, the Shafi'i school, and the Hanbali school, zakat remains a debt, and therefore the debt will be allocated first from the estate before it's
Mm.
distributed amongst the inheritors. the zakat debt will be taken out. It'll be an obligation upon the estate. And so that's how it works with the other schools. So whichever method or methodology or school you follow, make sure to be cognizant of that. And if you're following the Hanafi school, you should be writing this down and making people aware. This is like, you should have these conversations with your family members.
Yeah.
It's with your spouse and partner. Look, this is my zakat obligation, and just make them aware. And that will be, and this is normal to have these types of conversations with your partners.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't have these conversations, but these are important conversations to have with people who are close to you, because there's real implications if we don't.
Yeah. I mean, just as a personal, practical example, as my children are getting a bit older, I have a spreadsheet template which I created many years ago. I probably should update it, but usual assets on one side, liabilities on the other, and then working out your net zakatable assets, and then all of that. So one thing that I've personally done as the children have got older and have more responsibility is I've told them this is where the file is. So if something happens, they know exactly where to locate the zakat record for the last year, and they can see what amounts have been paid to discharge the zakat and what the balance is that might need still to be paid. So I think that's just a sort of practical tip from my side, which people can listen to or ignore as they wish. So just moving on to the case study. And I think this is a good wrap up for Murabaha. So in this example, it's always good to give a live case study and break it down a little bit for our understanding. So Ahmed is an investor with Nesta and has invested £1,000 into a Murabaha transaction, which is a standard type of deal on our platform. And he invested that £1,000 on the 1st of January. The key facts in this case study are that 1,000 was invested. The opportunity showed a 10% per annum profit rate. So the profit per year is £100, so £200 over a 24-month investment term. And like all Nesta transactions, the profit is paid in monthly installments. So there's an amount that's paid on the 30th of every month, which is just a straightforward divide type of calculation. I've kept it simple. As a solicitor lawyer, we don't like doing maths, so I just use round numbers. Ahmed wants to calculate his zakat on the 1st of March. So this is starting one date, and then halfway through the year, he's got his calculation date on the 1st of March. And the profit that he has received up until the 1st of March, meaning the profit that has been received from January to February, that's all received by him on the 30th of each month. So the last payment that he received of profit was the 30th of April. So that's the case study that we're going to look at, just for the purposes of some of the questions that follow. And these questions are taken from the Telegram group. So thank you very much to the Nesta community for putting these questions forward. Hopefully a lot of people will know the answer from the discussion, but the first question is, what is zakat payable on? Meaning that the capital and the profit is being referred to there when Ahmed calculates his zakat on the 1st of March.
So the capital will be repaid upon maturity.
Yes.
Is that correct?
In 24 months.
So 24 months. So now zakat will be due because this is a receivable. All of it's receivable. So the capital will be paid to him after 24 months. Then zakat will be due upon the full capital now, as well as the outstanding balance of profits that are due to him. So the monthly payments are due to him for the remaining months. Zakat will be due upon all of them. But as we mentioned earlier, he has an option. He can pay this right now on the 1st of March, or he can wait until he receives the profits monthly. He can do this. Every time he receives profit, he can pay 2.5% from there. And when he receives the capital, he can pay 2.5% on the 1,000 at that moment in time.
Perfect. And one of the misconceptions or the one confusion simply arises is that calculation for that 12-month period, or is it for the 24-month period of the investment term? So is it over 1,100 or 1,200?
Yeah, so zakat works as a snapshot calculation.
Yeah,
It's based upon at this particular moment in time on the 1st of March, what are your receivables
yeah.
altogether? And so if he's received already £100, or it'll be for the full balance,
For the
the
full balance of the
1,200,
investment term. Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
But then, as we mentioned, when you're actually calculating, then anything you've received thus far
yeah.
and spent, you don't need to
And
take that into
spent.
consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. So the next question, and you've answered the question without maybe 30 seconds too early, but what is the difference between profit paid and spent and profit that is still to be received? In other words, future monthly installments after the 1st of March. And you were just answering that question, actually. So you've said that anything that has been received by the 1st of March, so January, February, March, April, if that's in the bank account, then that will be included because it's in the cash balance. But if that has all been consumed, so it's been spent on whatever, and none of that received profit from January to April exists anymore, then there's no zakat to be paid on that. So you'll be
Absolutely.
then paying zakat on the calculation from the 1st of March onwards for what is to be received over the balance of the 24-month term.
That's absolutely right. So zakat will not be paid on any profit which was received and spent. Once it's received, you treat profit as any other cash that you have.
Yeah.
But if you spend it, then zakat functions and is obliged upon things that you own. If I don't own money, I don't have to pay zakat on it anymore. Even though it was one day before my zakat year
Yeah.
end or my zakat anniversary, I spend that money even one day before. I do not have to pay zakat on that.
Yeah.
So that's how zakat works. It's that snapshot calculation on my zakat date, the day I pay zakat. What do I own? What have I? What and on that zakat is paid. If I spend something, it does not matter at all.
Yeah. And this comes back to the earlier point that it's not an income tax. It's a snapshot of your wealth on a particular calculation date.
That's absolutely right.
And drives home that point. So the third question from the community is, how is zakat calculated when the Murabaha contract is for 24 months? What does the investor do on 1 March this year and then 1 March in the following year? And I think we've answered this question already in the previous two answers. Is there anything else you wanted to add on this question?
Yeah, so just to clarify, you just calculate your zakat on your zakat date using the outstanding balance that's owed to you. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And that will give you your zakatable amount. So you can go on your dashboard and your platform and see this is the full outstanding balance that's owed to me. And you can just add that to your spreadsheet for zakat purposes.
And anything that's been paid that's sitting in your bank account will be caught anyway as the cash item in your asset side of the table. And anything spent, even if it's the day before your calculation date, is disregarded.
Correct.
Next question is, what about when a buyer settles the Murabaha? So for those that are not familiar with the Nesta platform, and maybe for the non-Muslim customers, a buyer is like a borrower in conventional speak. So what about when a buyer settles the Murabaha early and the investor has paid zakat on the basis of a 24-month investment? How should the investor treat the overpayment? So on the 1st of March, there was the balance of the year to the 31st of December, and the investor decided to pay zakat on the full receivable. And there's now been an overpayment before the actual maturity date of the Murabaha.
So for the viewers, typically when a Murabaha is settled early, then the outstanding profit is typically reduced in that the amount paid is less than the full term. And that's typically done voluntarily because it's permissible to have a voluntary rebate and a voluntary you could say waiver of the outstanding balance. Because they've paid early, you can agree that I'll reduce the full sum. That's not a problem from a Sharia perspective. Now, in this situation, if an investor calculated the zakat thinking they'll be receiving the full amount and they overpaid zakat as a result.
Yeah.
Then the excess zakat that they've paid can be carried forward and netted off against your zakat liability in the following year. So it's
Amazing.
absolutely fine to net off the overpayment with next year's zakat liability.
So it's like a business having a carry forward loss in some ways. To
Exactly that.
draw the parallel with the filing discussion that we had earlier on taxes.
Yeah. So you can net her off
Great.
against your zakat liability in the following year. That's up because you paid with a very clear intention. You just paid zakat. That's what you've paid. So because
Yeah.
of your intention, that ascertains and allocates that wealth and designates that wealth as zakat. So you just pay zakat for the following year. I can pay zakat right now for 5 years in advance if I want to.
Mm.
So some people do this. Some people, they feel more generous and they say, look, I want to give an extra £500 in zakat. They can then use that £500 to offset the zakat due next year
Yeah.
and the year after. Other people, they say, I will not give with the intention of zakat. I'll just give with the intention of sadaqah.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely fine also.
Yeah. I had a conversation with my mother about this last week because I think previous year I had given her the same advice. So, mashallah, over the last 12 months, she's made a dual intention that certain amount is going for sadaqah through a direct debit, and then a certain amount is going through as advanced zakat payment, which she then is reconciling at the end of the year. So it's quite a helpful way in which you can manage your own books if you want to spread it across the year, mashallah.
I've always seen our parents and the elderly generation do something amazing, which is they're very cautious on these matters. So they'll always top up. So even though it's
Yeah.
2.5%, some of them will end up paying 3%. And
Yeah.
just with this, that if I've miscalculated, I've forgotten something.
Yeah.
So that's out of caution. It's not necessary, but it's just nice to see how people take this seriously and the
Yeah.
caution that they apply upon themselves.
Absolutely. And just maybe the final question on Murabaha, what mistakes do you commonly see people making when it comes to Murabaha and zakat calculations?
Yeah, so the most common one is people don't understand the investment or the structure that
Yeah.
that they're involved in. So they are of the view there is no zakat on there because they are thinking, yeah, well, I've invested in property
Yeah.
or I'm doing something else, and so there's no zakat. So this is the major misunderstanding that people have when it comes to murabaha. Another one is perhaps they think that zakat is not due on the capital or the principal amount, the investment, and zakat is only due on profits. And that comes from like the capital gains tax kind of concept and idea, where some people think zakat is only due on profit. That's another one. And the third one is many people, this is very common. Many people think you deduct the nisab amount, the threshold. So that they think you pay zakat only on the funds
So
and the monies that you have.
it's like a personal allowance in tax again.
Exactly. That's how people treat this. That this is personal allowance. This is zakat free,
Yeah.
and anything over and above that is what I pay zakat on. But
Yeah.
that's not the case. Zakat, the threshold is just a threshold, the benchmark. You've reached that, you pay zakat on it. If you don't, you don't pay. But you do include the funds below the threshold as well in your zakat calculation.
Great. Thank you. So that's for our listeners and viewers, that's our section on Murabaha. Hopefully everyone has taken some benefit from the answers. Just very quickly moving on to Ijara, and it'll be a very quick discussion because we've already talked about it. But how is the zakat treatment for Ijara? Taking that example into account previously, so we can go back to it maybe. Let's assume that this was a Ijara investment where £1,000 was invested into an Ijara financing. A typical Ijara transaction, lease to own, also known as lease to own in different markets. How would the treatment differ using this case study if it was Ijara?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question in that a lease structure, it changes the dynamics where you are now owning a share in the property, you're owning some equity in the property, you're not trading that. But there is something to highlight up here is in a lease to own, because the intention is to effectively sell on, there may be certain scholars with a view that
Yeah.
zakat is due upon the full balance again,
Yeah.
because you've acquired the asset with the very intention to resell or to release again and for capital gain. Whereas some will say, no, that's not the case. Rather, you are just leasing right now. And that is the intention. And in the future, there's an option. They'll purchase it in the future.
There's a wa'ad, which is a separate contract, and whether or not it gets exercised is dependent on its terms.
Exactly. So in that instance, then zakat will not be due as a sale. It's not guaranteed. You're not selling. You're now leasing only. And because of that, your principal appear in this example, £1,000 are invested. You've just got a share in a property, and you're earning monthly rental. And so that rental, because it's cash, that will be subject to zakat. But unlike your murabaha, where it was profit against a trade asset, against inventory, up here it's rental. It's outstanding rental. Zakat is not due on rental outstanding. So the 24 months, I don't have to pay now. I'll only pay zakat on whatever I have received as cash. The outstanding rental is not subject to zakat because it's outstanding against a personal asset. Rental property as an asset is not subject to zakat. Rental property is deemed to be personal assets. You're not doing business in there. It's not a trade asset because you're not buying and selling that particular property. So the zakat treatment completely changes in that there's no zakat at all on the invested amount, the capital and the principal. The outstanding balance of rental income is not subject to zakat either because it's all outstanding there. But the only thing subject to zakat is money that you've received, and it's part of your cash savings and your cash balance. That will be subject to zakat.
Yeah, and I think that's the way that you've described it is also how I think the AOFI Sharia standards describe it in the context of financial assets of a bank. So I think here in the Middle East, that's how they kind of treat it as well, even though there's a purchase undertaking or wa'ad to exercise at some point if that's needed. That's very helpful. So thank you very much. We've now covered both Murabaha and Ijara. And so I think it's probably time to wrap up a little bit. And maybe we can just close with some practical guidance for closing. So for everyday investors who have different financial assets, different Islamic investments, what practical steps would you recommend to ensure that they calculate their zakat accurately?
I mean, number one, I would say in this day and age, use a calculator online. I find it to be very helpful as well. Many of these investment platforms, the Muslim platforms, they have zakat calculators with all the different fields and types of investments that a person typically makes. So that can be very handy to use when calculating your zakat. The second advice I would give is keep a record of everything. We live in a very busy world. Just managing yourself and managing your life and managing the information in your own personal data requires time and effort today.
Yeah.
Because data is an extension of our busy lives, right?
Yeah.
So manage your data on, you may be using, for instance, I'm very fond of using Microsoft OneNote. I use that for literally everything. My whole life is on OneNote, right? But I've centralized it for a reason. Because if it was decentralized and I'm using so many different things, then it can become very cumbersome for me to recall where I've put something. So
yeah,
I may not know what it is, but I know where it is, and I can just do a couple of searches and find what I'm looking for. So it's very good practice just to keep tabs and track of your information in your data, especially your spiritual data, like your zakat and these things. People have sometimes salah outstanding. Maybe when they were young, they didn't perform salah. So all of these things, or a person has fidya, or a person is not fasting, for instance, and they have to make some payments for that. These are all things that we should keep a track of and update regularly. It's become very easy in this day and age.
Yeah, I mean, just even on our phones, we have a notes app where we can just jot things down. It's quite easy to then not forget. And that's really helpful practical advice, Mufti Saab. Thank you. When should an investor look to come to a scholar or seek professional advice when it comes to zakat? What would your advice be to someone? Do they need to, if they understand it, do they need to run their figures by someone, or should they just come to someone when there's a doubt or a question?
I think at least every single person should once in their life at least run through what they're doing and just double check with a scholar, get the key principles in place. Now that can happen even through a webinar or a live Q&A online or anything as long as you have that assurance that what you're doing is reasonable and sensible, that works as a foundation. And then as long as nothing changes, there's no material change in your calculation, you can continue calculating every single year. When a
Yeah.
new asset comes into your spreadsheet and you're unsure, that's when you should and must get consultation and advice and just seek scholarly opinion on how to treat that particular investment or asset class for zakat purposes.
Amazing, great. And just the last question, and we'll end here. And again, just focusing on practical advice for our listeners. What's the one key takeaway that you would like the audience to remember about zakat and Islamic investments?
The one key takeaway is feel your zakat. I think this is so important today because zakat has become very much automated. It is really automated for many people.
Yeah.
We're very detached. We don't understand. We just treat it as every other outgoing that we have from our bank. And it's not really the same as any other outgoing. This is something which is central to your faith, and it's meant to add value to you spiritually and emotionally and mentally and even physically. It's meant to add some value. You're supposed to go there with the individual and feel that payment that you're giving. And that's the essence of zakat. If I've been paying zakat for 10 years, but I've never felt anything about that zakat, I've never really experienced zakat, then I may be paying zakat technically, but the pillar and why it's a pillar, I've never really engaged with that. Zakat is something you experience, not something you just pay. And that's the most important thing. It's an experience. It really is like going to sight the moon, right? For Ramadan, and everybody goes, it's an experience. You go out there to look for the moon. And just in the activity, the hour, 2, 3 hours, there's so much you experience and you feel and you engage with. So when you leave your house with some cash or with some funds and you walk in the streets and you see somebody there, how you approach them, how you speak with them, how you comfort them, how you uplift them, that's all part of the zakat experience. The zakat is more than just a payment. It's a full package of experience which uplifts you and uplifts the recipient and beneficiary. And that's how a community is formed, because zakat is really community building, it's society building. And you can only build a society when you mix with society. So my only takeaway would be on your investments, yes, you have large amounts and it might not be always easy carrying £5,000 or £10,000. You can go and distribute like it, although zakat is obligatory, for instance, with Ahmad on the 1st of March or whichever date, you don't have to give your zakat immediately. You
Yeah.
can distribute it over the months as well. So take out some pockets, £500 today, maybe £500 next week, £500 the following. You got £2,000 to pay. You can take that money out over the month and give it to different causes, different people. You may want to automate some, but treat your zakat like this is another thing as well. You can diversify your
Yeah.
zakat payments. Many of us just lump it to one
Send it to
particular
this
cause.
one. Yeah,
That's
one
it.
cause. That's it.
But then
Yeah.
feel like maybe look at different projects, different things, different people, even your family. This is another very important. There's actually more reward giving to a family member who's zakat eligible. This is besides your spouse, your children, your parents and grandparents. So not your ascendants, not your descendants, and not your spouse.
Yeah.
Beyond these individuals, just say there's a brother, you have a brother somewhere who's in need. There's more reward in supporting your brother with zakat than it is with somebody else. That's the reality. So
Yeah.
allocate some funds to your family as well. Many of us, we have family in different parts of the world who are struggling. We've been blessed. So we should honor that ties of kinship that we have and support that, support our families in different parts of the world also.
Yeah, I think the impact of zakat is very, very important. People, we all need to think about the impact of our donation and the project involved, and think about the charities that we are supporting. I mean, we often all pile into one, and that, and maybe because that particular campaign or that particular charity has done a very good marketing job on that campaign, but what about all the other things, the other needs that we have? In the UK, food banks is a huge issue, right? So there's lots of other worthy causes out there that we should be thinking about. So I think we can end there. Jazakallah khair for your help with this difficult, often complex topic, Mufti Faraz. I think our listeners, our audience has definitely benefited from this detailed session on Murabaha and Ijarah. And inshallah, we pray that Allah allows us to reach the month of Ramadan and that we take full benefit of this spiritual month, including for those of us that are calculating our zakat in this month. Let it be a means of purification and ibadah in itself for us as well. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much.